wasn't ready to do that.
What did you get for us?
But that's what I get for Thanks, Mom. That's totally what my mom would say. So I have a million questions, and I didn't get to ask any of them before I talked to you there, but I'm going to ask them now because I happen to find out that this is happening. So I'll just ask one instead of all million of them. But I want to ask you about, and I always give too much preamble to everything, but just to preface, I apologize. I can neither confirm nor deny that I finished the book yet. But you mentioned in the trip talk that you did a couple weeks ago that you didn't use the word feminist or feminism at all. Should I just
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, just speak loud. So you kind of intimated in the trip talk that that was a conscious decision to do that, and I feel like you can understand why you can do that because you know it's a really loaded term in church culture, and if you want people to actually listen to what you say, you kind of can't use that word, even though they kind of apply it to you anyway because they know what you're talking about. At least that has been my experience. So I'm curious, was that really your thought process in consciously making that decision? Was that you wanted people to really listen and not get tangled on that kind of loaded term? But then also, do you identify personally as a feminist and you kind of just didn't want to say so? Or are you kind of that, I'm not a feminist, but I believe everything a feminist believes, kind of. It's totally fine. I mean, I don't say that as a criticism at all, but would you like to speak to that?
Certainly, yes. So I think you're absolutely right that in my good professional fashion, I wanted to be first and foremost sensitive to my audience. And to go along with that, I had a point to prove, which is that we can have this entire conversation without labeling one side or the other. Right? This isn't about sides. This isn't about whether you identify with this ideology or not. This is about getting down to each person being a son or daughter of our Heavenly Father and working together to approach Zion, right? So overlaying these sort of earthly ideologies didn't seem effective to me, and that was really it. I wanted to model the kind of conversation that I was going to hope were going to happen among members of the church who might not ever identify with that term themselves. The term itself, I think, the reason that I historically have kind of waffled with self-identifying as a feminist is because I've never been able to fully land on one side or the other of what I think is a sort of binary word. When I was growing up in New York City, I went to an all-girls school, and feminist in that context for 13 years meant you are an activist. You seize power from men. You are unhappy with the way things are, and you are more enlightened and have a better vision. And it was a kind of separatist. This was New York City in the 1980s. You know, women were going to Wall Street with big shoulder pads. So it was a very specific definition, right? And so when I first started working in this space, that was what I had in my mind, and I didn't really just think that fit me. I think, you know, I've met people who I say in their very DNA they are an activist, and that I don't feel like that is me, so that at that time I didn't identify as that. However, the flip side of the word, of course, and I think that comes from this sort of IST at the end of the word, or the ISM, the feminist or the feminism. In our mind, rhetorically, we kind of identify IST words with things that we don't want to be. They define non-normative behavior, racist, sexist, masochist. You know, these are not things that we want to be identifying with. So why is feminist all of a sudden like all the sunshiny word, whereas all those other things are really terrible? So rhetorically, I think we have a hard time with that, especially if we're not familiar with feminist theory, where the word comes from. But on the flip side, the idea that every woman has the inherent right to pursue her talents, interests, and full potential in safe and nurturing environments is the definition of feminism. And if we don't believe that, we need to re-examine our understanding of our doctrine. And it's that definition that allows members of the church to claim that they are feminists, and it's that definition that allows feminists to say that they are Mormon. And so, in that regard, there's nothing else I could be. So, but unfortunately, I do feel the need to have that sort of extended explanation, and I know that not all women do, and that it serves a very useful purpose for a lot of people. But, again, being sensitive to my audience, I wanted to be steer clear of any negativities. Do you want to say anything about that?
I want to hear from, you're great. I want to hear from the thoughts percolating in all of these minds. There's a question right here. Stand up and speak up.
Is it me?
Yes,
yeah.
Sarah.
Hi. I love that definition of feminism. So I kind of wrote down my question because I wanted it to be clear. So the book deals with changes on a local level, like person to person, a person talking to their bishop, a relief society president, and a state president, whatever it may be. Really trying to help readers innovate within the given structure and policies. And I really appreciated the suggestions, and I also found myself, I feel like I really appreciated the realism in the book at times too, where you say, here's an example of somebody trying to innovate. It did not work, and it was a disappointment. And so I appreciated that realism too. And I found myself kind of hoping for, even as I felt like these suggestions were really actionable, also hoping for more widespread changes so that each person who had a similar idea for improvement wouldn't have to kind of like reinvent the wheel and sometimes succeed and sometimes not. And so my question for each panelist kind of relates to what Maxine was saying about these ideas that maybe start from the bottom and you just kind of work up the chain, and then somebody up near the top is like, that's a great idea. So for each panelist, if you were to imagine maybe one or two broader changes in terms of gender dynamics or roles or responsibilities in the church, maybe like more church-wide changes with the policies or the structures, what innovations would you most hope for, would be like most encouraging to you? It could be things, suggestions from the book that you'd like to see adopted more widely, or things that are just like especially important to you. I'm just curious about like imagining how things could be different.
I'll give you a moment to think and just say that's a very real concern. And so the book was written for one reason, to help, I hope, even out some of the disparity that we find in the various practices of the wards. Because there is a lot of inconsistency, right? I mean, depending on where you're living, depending on the personality of your leaders and the board members. So that's a real concern. And one of the purposes of the book was to say, hey, look, they're doing this in New York, San Francisco, and Boston, but why not in
Kanash?
Okay, thank you. I want to come off as a snobby New Yorker there, so and the other thing is that we've established a website called womeninchurch.com, and the purpose of it is for people to submit their stories of things that are working in their wards, so that we can actually create that crowdsourced library of best practices, which we've never really had as a people before. We kind of have this like at the dinner table, well, my ward they do this, my ward they do that, and then at the very top, this is leadership to worldwide leadership training, right? But you don't have anything in the middle. So that was my way of addressing very real concerns.
Well, you might lose your job, but I'm not losing mine. I think in the church, and I don't represent the church, this is just me in my heart. I just think it's so important to realize that as much as we strive for evenness, because we are a global church and because our leadership at the local level is always changing, there is going to be some messiness and there is going to be some unevenness. And isn't that part of the deal, that no matter who your Relief Society president is, or your Young Women president, or your bishop, or your stake president, that it doesn't change your testimony because you are a disciple of Christ, first and foremost, and he or she may be in that position for his or her growth. And you might have to work with that person for your growth. And it's never going to be perfect. Now, that doesn't mean we don't try and share ideas and use the technology that we have to flood the earth with great things that we can all avail ourselves of. Absolutely. And I think that what's been modeled for the last decade-ish for us and taught from the top down is taking hold from the grassroots up, and that's women on councils and women's voices, and not just a token one. But, you know, I think in your book, did you say 2 to 3? 3. 3 women is the critical change. And so I'm just, you know, off the top of my head, at least Presley and women and primary members, there you go. You know, you've got at least 3. And so I love when you have women's voices at the table, and I think that that's so helpful in any situation when you're trying to minister on a ward or a state level. I think it's helpful to model what we've been taught by our leaders, and that is just be more fully engaged with councils. And I think we're getting better at that, and those things just, you know, culturally they take time to really take hold the way they are supposed to, and then flourish the way God would have them flourish.
One other thing I think we always have to keep in mind is we tend to focus on the thing that is the most immediate to us and where we are. But, you know, this is about local impact, but not only couldn't help but pepper it with some things that are happening on the general level much better than they are at the local level. And you can say, well, yeah, moving them into the middle of the rostrum was because of this and that and the other. I don't care why it happened. Okay. But what we always forget is, my sister always calls us the deep Mormon culture zone. You know, what's happening from southern Idaho to northern Arizona? Not even what's happening in Colorado. And when I read about it, and so we have, because of our culture and our opportunities in America right now, we have women who feel constrained. And yet the very organization and practices that seem constraining to some of our sisters here are incredibly liberating, progressive for someone you've got. I mean, several times you quoted Elder Ben or Apollo. And what we forget is the Lord has to work with all of us. That's 5 billion, you know, 14 million to 5 billion, right? And sometimes we don't, and this is why I mentioned earlier, you know, the example of my sister not wanting to do the family prayer. It's not just a matter that we may lose some quote-unquote traditionals if we push or change too far. I mean, you were mentioning, I love what you said about diversity doesn't equal disunity, but the Lord has to work with all of His children. And we have to be willing to work with each other. This is an anecdote, I won't go on any longer, because I want to hear what Maxine has to say about this. But certain things were going on for a couple conferences. And I, of course, didn't say anything about them on campus. But I heard a lot of people saying negative things. And so the only thing I ventured to say publicly was the example of what I call the holiday dinner. You know, and I'm not saying that certain approaches or methods were right or wrong for those people, but there is a time, Neylan mentions, that sometimes we have to be patient, sometimes we have to wait, sometimes changes are generational. And as siblings, we can duke it out and fight. We're still siblings. But you know, when we get together for Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, sometimes for the sake of mom and dad who just want their families together, we shut up for that dinner. You know, we'll duke it out after we've done the dishes. And my point was, I was actually trying to get some people, in particular conservative men, to stop criticizing some people that were seen as activists. You know, I said, let's just be the body of Christ for a few moments. I understand the frustration. You know, how are these things going to happen? But the reality is, my responsibility is to myself, my family, the people I teach, the people I come in contact with. And you know, sure, I wish someone would call in and say, so what do you think? Well, they don't. But, you know, we can make incremental changes. And what I said, I know it was couched in kind of, you know, mystical terms, but I really do believe that God cares about all His children. He wants us to see us move forward. And I really believe what I said about the top, the bottom, the middle, and the margins. We all have to be ready to move for some of the really big things. We don't want to leave anybody behind. Enough people have been left out. The answer is never, you know, this is the funny thing. When people have new ideas, good ideas, right ideas, we sometimes become more intolerant than the people with the old ideas. I think we have to be very cautious about that. I think we have to be very cautious to not be on the wrong side of being intolerant. And we need to be understanding of everyone.
Of all the changes that I think we can make as a church to move into the fullness of the restoration, first on my list has always been the restoral of the full authority of the Relief Society and its role as an equal parallel organization defined in the Relief Society minutes and reiterated by Eliza R. Snow in 1884, that it was designed to be a self-governing organization whose members went to their Relief Society leaders for interviews and solving of problems, and all the way up to the state, to the general board. I would like to see the full authority restored and the fullness of women's authority as it was established in those first 14 years, 1830 to 44, fully restored. And now, it's the most, in my opinion, it's the most exciting time for women in the church, and I know it doesn't feel that way. It's paradoxical. It feels like a terrible time. I can tell you it's not as bad as it was. Nowhere near as hard as it was 20 years ago. We're going through some hard things. We're going through growing pains. We're confronting ourselves. We're learning how to do it differently this time. But it's the most exciting time in Mormon women's history because all that history is coming back. And you can see a lot of it on the Joseph Smith Papers project. But all of that information about women's ministry and authority and equality is coming back. So now we have the documents. We have everybody working on it, from feminists at Exponent 2 to historians in the historical department to leaders to members of boards to Relief Society presidents. We are all working on this together. So that's what I'd like to see. More from all.
Okay, I've got a question. So I somewhat anticipate that at the local level, if women start asking questions and start suggesting things, that leaders might look at each other and say, "Can you do that?" You know what I mean? So my question is, do you worry that in response to this book, in response to women probing, that the church will double or triple the size of handbook number 2, making the policies more specific, extensive, and exclusive, effectively turning what are now policy gray areas into definitive black and white areas?
That is a real fear that I've thought about. Nobody wants more rules. In some ways, the antidote to discrepancies that we find from word to word is more rules, and it is a thicker handbook, but the sort of thicker handbook that I think we appear would like to be writing. But we'll see how, but that is a real fear. And I like to take hope from the section in the handbook that I quote quite a bit, which is the section on adaptability. I mean, there's a chunk in there on adapting for the needs of your own congregation that I think gets overlooked a lot. And I also like to look at the emphasis that leaders rhetorically have been putting these days on our commonalities as men and women, rather than in decades past there's been a lot of rhetoric around differences in different roles. And I like to think that the pendulum might be swinging a little bit to where we're saying, okay, we've established that point, let's move back to talking about the commonality of priesthood power. That I think was really at the heart of what Elder Rose was saying in the last conference. He's like, what other power do women have except priesthood power? That was his way of saying, we're forgetting the commonalities here. We're forgetting that this is an interdependent process towards exaltation. Men and women are dependent on each other and have to work together to achieve that. We've forgotten that, right? So that I see glimpses of that. But I'd be curious to hear what you would say about.
You know what? I don't think so. I don't have a fear of that, and I'll tell you why. I just don't remember the date in my 53 years. What I've seen, at least my experience has been, that more personal responsibility has been given each of us. So when I was a little girl, it was the block Sunday schedule. So rather than going to church twice right on Sunday, I know a lot of you can't remember that, but I do. And the directive from the church leaders was to have a more holy Sabbath day. And what you would do with that day was up to you. The burden, the onus, the responsibility became yours. As I grew older, it just seemed like I went to the temple when I got married, and in my lifetime I've seen that change. And again, I feel like the responsibility is on the individual to step up his or her spirituality or commitment. And then here we have the missionary change. And again, what does that say to all of the young people of our church? That it's up to you to prepare earlier, more fully. And so I feel like in my lifetime, rather than having more rules imposed, the only thing that I really see is that you need to take the responsibility of discipleship more fully on the individual. So I don't have that fear really at all.
Well, these handbooks from the previous handbook, I mean, for those of us who remember the old handbook, it actually was a simplification. So I also think sometimes, and maybe this is me as just, you know, the ever happy, optimistic person, I think our leaders, not just the brethren, but the sisters there too, they're much more aware of these issues than we sometimes think.
No,
They're following, they're listening. I mean,
there's no question, with all of the interaction that I had in my lifetime with both the general officers, the women officers, and the general authorities, it was always a little bit of a head scratcher for me to have people in an almost, I don't know, just in a funny little way say, well, we need to cut them some slack, they're old, they may not understand this. And I think, oh, they are so informed, they ask their wives, they ask their daughters, they want to hear from their granddaughters. These are as informed and caring about the individual as any men and women you'll find anywhere.
I will be bold in regard to your questions and things I'd like to see, and I think we'll be able to see it. I'd like to hear more of the general authorities and the general officers of the church. I'd like to hear that more. And one of the things you mentioned
as a phrase.
As a phrase.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, this is just me looking at it. To me, the general presidencies, and here, I mean, men and women, to me, they're not general authorities, but they're general officers of the church, whereas area authorities have just over areas, you know. And one of the things that you chronicled was the move for some of our general officers to no longer speak just to constituencies, right? So we had that talk, who was it on pornography?
Linda Reese.
Yeah, you know. Or when we had, was the young women's president who did the YouTube video the day of Kate Kelly's, you know. And Oscarson. So, you know, that's something I'd love to see. My wife was a big fan of Sherry Dews, you know. I mean, I'd love to hear some women preach. Now, you probably can't say something preaching. But, you know, the idea of doctrinal talks and addressing the whole church at every single level. At every single level, the ward, in the stake, in area conferences, and instantly, I think we see more of that happen at the general level than we do in our ward and stake level.
I remember sitting there listening to Sister Elaine Dalton speak about fatherhood. Do you remember her talking to it? And I thought, this is an historic moment because this woman, who's a general president, is preaching and she's teaching and instructing the men of our church about their stewardship as fathers. And I thought it was spectacular.
Well, let me tell you something in your book. My daughter mentioned, 17 years old. She said, you know, the difference is when you're not talking women as women, but you're just talking to them as members of the church. Whether you're the male leader talking to the women, or you're the woman leader talking to the woman, or the woman leader talking to the whole church, treating each other as people yoked in the same work, the same body of Christ. I'd love to see that, and I think we're starting to see that. And I think as more of the general leaders do that, it will actually encourage people to love close. So that's actually an example I think we're going to see some trickle down, just perfectly.
It's not a 52% special interest.
Right, that's right.
Back to the question about the church handbook instructions and rules. You know, there are some really positive, exciting things in there, and some less positive, less exciting things in the handbook of instructions. And I'll never forget in 1999, was it 1999? The new policy came out, the new handbook came out, and the new policy on birth control said it's entirely up to an individual, a couple, as to how many children they will have. And church members should not counsel each other in this matter. And that was so groundbreaking and historic that I gave 3 talks and wrote an article all about it. But you know, in terms of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, I have a bishop who goes by the spirit of the law. And the first time I walked into his office to find out whether I could really come back to the church or not, he said, Sister Hanks, I want you to know, I go by the spirit of the law and not by the letter of the law in the handbook. And every time he's faced with a situation, a problem, he prays and asks, what would Christ do? And he's told me there are times when the handbook would say he should impose some disfellowshipment or disciplinary pressure, but he'll pray and he'll get a different answer. And he goes by the Spirit. And in fact, he'll get an answer to call someone to a position instead. So, you know, the Spirit is the key.
One thing, I've been involved in handbooks for years as a leader. And one thing in handbook training for that handbook 2 that I will remember always is their quote from the 12, that the handbook facilitates revelation. I wrote it in my handbook, you know, that you can't pass it on now, you know, or you have it online, but it facilitates revelation. And I have found as a leader, there's a lot of loose stuff in there. Like you may do this, you can't do that. They really are giving you more latitude than I've ever seen in my years as a member of the church tenure. And so I think it does facilitate revelation in many ways. And it's a huge improvement from old handbooks, even though there might still be certain things, you know, that revelation, your bishop is seeking revelation. That's the most important.
This maybe isn't as much of a question as a request, but I'm saddened by, I would call it an exodus of people of my generation, people of my age from the church. And I just wondered if you knew, and I know that a lot of it has to do with these sorts of issues, and I'm excited to be with Neylan to see kind of more of a more patient and thoughtful way. But I think that people of my generation are not especially patient and thoughtful. So I was wondering if you wanted to speak to what's happening with my age group.
I think all 4 of us would say it's heartbreaking beyond words and beyond description because, you know, as we've all interfaced with different groups, whether they are feminist groups or church groups or community groups, I know that for me, I get the intense feeling every time that we need everyone, every single one. We need them. We need, like I said, it's that linking arms. And so I think that we have to honor people's personal journey. It's part of their agency and part of their path, and they get to figure that out. But we've got to love them, and the door needs to be open, and we need to always, continually extend invitations to talk. You know, you can have the most disparate ideologies, and if those 2 people, the people that carry them, will sit down at the same table, they'll find commonality. And so I feel like if the door can swing wide open and always be open, perhaps they will want to return. We need to make that an easy way back. And if they choose not to, we love them. We share what we can with them. We give them the pieces that feel good to them. And we try to act as disciples of Christ, which is to love each one, irrespective of where they are in their personal life.
I mean, we're always less when people leave.
Always.
We're always less when people leave. But there's also a cultural thing I'm about to reveal. In fact, I'm about to tip over that 50 barrier. But as I look at culture now, there is a certain impulsiveness, and there is a certain arbitrariness and a rush, and you know, things were so visually and otherwise sensitized to things. And one of the things I loved about the prayer process chapter was we need to just step back and think and ruminate, and let the Spirit work with us and work with the people that are bugging us. You know, I love what you were saying. The relationship is 2 people. We're always having a problem. We're always having a problem. But we're less for every person that leaves, whether it's for gender reasons, whether it's for behavior reasons, whether it's sexuality, but whatever, intellectual minorities. I mentioned all the different groups we need to be listening to and valuing. We're always less. And I think it pains people at every level of the church. If anything, I think, once again, local level, I think the people that are the biggest problem are always us. It's the local people. It's the people in your ward who say good riddance, and who are kind and charitable to each other. But it's a problem. It's being discussed at all levels of the church, what we can do about this.
Also, I know it sounds simplistic, but we have to focus on the positive and on solutions and find ways to turn this around. And there are ways we can all participate in that. Because things can always get worse. Whether I'm working on a problem in my condo or a problem with a friendship or a relationship, if I let it go, it'll just get worse. If I jump in and do the right things to remedy at the right times, I can shift it. I can turn it around. I can fix it. And we need all of us right now. This is a really hard time. And I have friends, I have feminists I've never met email me and call me and message me on Facebook every week asking for ideas and inspiration and help. Some of whom are facing discipline. I call them on the phone. We talk for an hour. I give them ideas. I pray with them to help them turn that around in a positive direction. It's so easy to go into the negative and go into fear and talk about things as if they're worse than they are. We don't need to talk about things as if they're worse. Things are bad enough in some places. We've got to know that we have the power within us to shift something. And we've got to focus on turning it around in whatever way we can.
And I love that all of the focus, so much of the focus is on the second 2/3 of the book. Because that is, I think, where people are feeling that positive energy and feeling that empowerment. However, I would write a whole book about the first third of the book, which is the unanswered questions of why, for this generation, your generation, I'm in my late 30s, I'm not old, and I still remember Sally Ride going up in the Challenger because I was at an all-girls school, the whole school, I was in 3rd grade, the whole school came together to watch the first woman in space. My 3 daughters, the oldest is 10, unless Hillary Clinton gets elected president or some other woman in their lifetime, they will never have that experience of coming together as a community and seeing a woman do something for the first time. Those things aren't celebrated anymore, happily, because they're much more commonplace than they were, 27 years ago. And so, that is what the first part of this book is about. It is the fact that the women your age are growing up in a world that doesn't support any separate spaces for men and women. And that's the first time in our history that has been an accepted truth in modern developed countries. And I think that is absolutely momentous. And so I'm looking at the way my girls are growing up, and I'm looking at the fact that the church is the only place that they are being told that something is off limits to them because of their gender. That is a fact. And you can say, I understand why those things are off limits to them because of their gender. But the fact remains that we are not a hermetic religion, right? We're being told, on the contrary, go out, get an education, experience your community, be out there among the people, not only for missionary efforts, but for your own personal development, right? We're no longer siphoning ourselves off behind the big walls of Temple Square ready for the U.S. government to invade. We are out there, and what that means is that we're having lived experiences in the world, which are telling me, that I can be president of the United States very literally if I want to. I can be a CEO, I can be president of a company, I can aspire to anything that a man aspires to now, organizationally, institutionally, except in one place, right? So I think that for me, what was so important about that first third is to say, I think a large solution for girls of your age is to address that fact up front. Young, talk about this is a different structure. It's a totally different paradigm than what you're going to experience in the world. This is why we think it is that way. We might not know for sure, but and let's talk about ideas. With my daughters, we talk about what were the effects of the fall. What did we learn in the temple? Well, maybe the way that the church structure is set up today doesn't exactly mirror the way Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother co-parent and maybe there's something about the way the world is operating that is what is good and that we should be taking and imposing on our church experience. Learning out of the best books, why not learn from the best institutions? The world is not all bad and the church is not all perfect. But teaching our girls to negotiate that and be very upfront about that, I think, for me as a mom, that is very real, and that's what I'm trying to do.
So when we're looking to include women's voices more in our talks and in our lessons, one of the struggles is that women's sermons haven't been as well documented in the past as they are currently. And I know, Neylan, a different event you have talked about some very beginning efforts to get more women's voices recorded. But I was interested, Maxine, by what you said about women being more likely to record their thoughts in personal narratives and stories. And I'm wondering what ideas all of you might have to where we can turn for more creative ways of including women's voices when we don't have the same plethora of women-led discourses or women-led sermons.
You're talking about on the general level, general conference.
Preferably something with authority and not necessarily scholarly, but with the priesthood authority behind it.
Right. That's a really big concern. And when I looked back over the last 30 years to see how many women were speaking in general conference versus men, first there weren't any, and then there was one. And now we have about 2, I think, each general conference. Is that about right?
90% of the speakers historically.
Yeah, and so it's improving, and they're working on that. The visibility of women's voices and women preaching and teaching. What's so interesting is that on the ward level, we do have much more parity. In sacrament meeting, which is the inclusive meeting where priesthood, quorums, and relief society come together and worship together, women speak, preach, testify from the pulpit. And women speak from the pulpit almost as much as men, depending on the meeting. But we're much closer to parity there. And all I can say is that it appears that the church is trying to incorporate female speakers more at the general level.
Can I also comment on that? You go first.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, all right. So I can speak a tiny little bit with some authority on this because I work for the church's editing department. And I only work with specific originating departments on their products. But with the writers I work with, one time I tried to say, what would you think about including more women's voices speaking with authority on any topic in this product? And I was told very assertively, well, the women leaders of the church don't speak on the scriptures, topics that we are addressing in this product. Because they have this one little database that they go to, and if they say, okay, I'm looking for a quote on this particular story in Matthew, and they put in that scripture reference, and it shows up, a bunch of general conference speakers who spoke referencing that particular reference in Matthew. And you generally won't find a lot of women's voices in there, even though I know that I have heard Sister Beck talk on that story in Matthew. I know it. President Beck, can you please start doing that? So here's my challenge to you. If there are historians or people who work with church documents in any way, please put together some kind of database that documents the topics and the scripture references and everything that we know that women leaders throughout the history of the church have been saying, and they just don't know to go to find them. Because they want a quick, easy answer, because we're always on really tight deadlines, because we're missing the work. So yeah.
You can do a word search on LDS.org through conference talks. It will bring us all the talks. But, yeah.
But it's not it doesn't have a rich historical database.
No.
So for the example I have in the book is Searching for Eliza Snow on LDS.org gets you, I think, 2 manual references.
Oh, okay. Okay, I gotta say.
Yes.
I'm on a team headed by Kate Holbrook and Jim
Yes.
Avery.
I was
that discourse.
Please, stand up
Stand
and
up and
tell us.
No reason to stand up.
But what
It's
you
coming out in 2017. And we're working on it like crazy. We've got wonderful scripturally, doctrinal, wonderful talks from the 1830s all the way up to 2010. And they're going to be published. It's going to be available to women to find something with a woman's voice. And it's happening.
So
When does that come out?
I didn't know if that was public. Is that something?
It's public.
It's public.
And UVU.
Yeah, she did, but you never know.
Well, the trick is for all of us to use it, not just women.
Oh, okay.
I never teach the story of Mary and Martha without quoting my part.
There you go.
You know, and so whether it be in your elders quorum lesson, your high priest lesson, or your sacrament talk, your stake talk, we just need to do it ourselves.
And not just the story of Mary Magdalene, right? I mean, anything.
Right, I mean, anytime you can find that explicates the scriptures, I mean, use both.
Was that official church, or was that like Deseret Book?
No, that's the church history library.
Okay.
And another thing on top of that is when we are in situations, and maybe whether it's to influence local leaders who make these decisions, or if like we are the presidents of our quorums or whatever, when we have an opportunity to give a 5th Sunday lesson on a subject, or a first Sunday lesson, and we're going to go to a general conference talk, I mean, you know, President Beck had a rough time with Mormon intellectuals coming out of the gates, but she did a couple of things that were really powerful. And one is that she always taught the church doctrine. She spoke as one having authority. And I remember conferences where she gave the best sermon, the most doctrinally rich talk of the entire conference. So if we want to talk about personal revelation and about how revelation works in our quorums, in sacrament meeting, and we're going to base it on a talk, go to President Beck. And these are things that we can do, and we don't need to wait for leaders. We don't need to have the database yet, because we do have these recent talks at our disposal. Pay attention in conference. Somebody's speaking, a woman is speaking, listen to what she's saying, and think about how can I, because we love parroting each other. We love doing like the cut and paste sermons where we just like quote general authorities, quoting other general authorities, and it's almost a comical part of our culture. Let's move women's voices into this comical part of our culture.
You know, I just want to add to what Brad said. It's not only about frequency and number and visibility of women's bodies speaking in meetings, but it's also the language and the topics, the information. Julie Beck is the one who brought in the word ministry and power of priesthood into discourse about the Relief Society. That was a shift that took place during her presidency, and I noticed this. That we weren't hearing that or seeing it much before. So the language that she brought forward, the language of empowerment, is the other side of how we increase women's voices.
I wanted to offer a suggestion in response to your question. Going to BYU Education Week books and database on BYU website can often give you like really good sermons for women of like all walks of life, and often on topics that are not just like women specific, but you know, prayer, tithing, things like that. And so, looking to Education Week, I think will often give you some really good stuff.
Let's have this be the last one.
Okay. Sorry, but I'm not a public speaker, so I don't pass out. So going back to what she was saying about usually in church. So I'll be honest, Kate Kelly got X, and first I cried a lot, and then I was angry, They agreed to recommend, I wrote a resignation letter, and I was just going to so mad. I didn't send it, but I'm still processing a lot of that anger. And I think one of the things that's difficult for me is that so many people would recognize that the anger they feel is real. So I guess that's my question is how do you go about changing things when there are so many people who won't recognize that we have a problem?
My heart goes out to you. I cried a lot too.
Yeah.
I was telling somebody earlier tonight, I've done a range of interviews over the past several weeks. And, being this middle ground person is a delightful place to be because if you're not making somebody angry, you are not doing your job, right? And so I had an interview with the Young Mormon Feminists on one day, and then the next day I was interviewed by a particularly conservative podcast the next day. And I was all geared up for these questions from Young Mormon Feminists. And, I was like,
we're intense.
Oh, yeah, okay, you're intense. Yeah. And I don't know whether it was you just stuck a particularly kind person on me or whatever, but it ended up being a really positive experience and a lot more sort of, she was willing to take the book for what it is and rather than try and sort of look at it as what she wanted it to be. And I really appreciated that. And it's much easier for me emotionally to defend this approach as a step than it was the next day when I went to a particularly conservative blogger who basically said what you're saying. I don't understand this. I don't know why this is necessary. I don't see this. It's just the way things are. I've gotten an email since that podcast from somebody saying, why can't you just accept that God's kingdom is different than the world's organizations? This is obviously the way it's supposed to be, and the world has gone astray. And for me, those are much harder questions to answer. And so I guess that's my way of saying, if I knew how to do that, that would be the holy grail, and that's why we keep coming back to these ideas of stories. Telling your story. I mean, if somebody here tonight has come in and said, "I don't understand why this is such a big deal," I'm so glad you stood up and spoke up and expressed that this is a true feeling and a true pain that you're experiencing because of the, what I think. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but because of the way I think. You're living in a life as a 21st century American girl that's very different from what you're experiencing in church. And we need to recognize that is hard. We can say, I think, as Eric alluded to, we can say that might not be wrong, but it, it's so hard. And I've struggled with it myself. I've decided that the blessings that I get from being a member of the church simply outweigh that discomfort. But for me, the discomfort has not gotten to the point where it's gnawing away at any goodness that I feel. I've been able to balance those, and so for me it works. But I think that's exactly the point of the whole first third of the book, is to engender compassion, to share stories, to close that divide that we're feeling in that virtual approach to Zion, because it's insidious and it's epidemic. What you're experiencing, this lack of understanding, lack of compassion. So thank you for speaking up.
Also, open up, speak, share what you're feeling. Don't suffer alone. Don't stay alone. Don't stay silent. Open up like you did tonight. Contact friends on Facebook. Go in, talk to your bishop. I went in and talked to my bishop about Kate Kelly's excommunication.
Mine is fabulous.
Oh, good.
Good. I got a gem of a bishop.
Good. Go and talk to, and ask him. Say, I want to talk to you about this. How do you see this? My bishop would have done things differently than Kate's did. Talk to other people. Don't stay alone. Share your truth. reach out, don't suffer in silence. It was a really hard week for me, probably the most intense week I've had in almost 20 years.
But please don't send that letter.
No. I wrote it about my
Pray,
and then put it in
persevere. You know, it's interesting because the gospel does bring joy and it should be joyful communion. But when we look at the most critical moments of Jesus' life, his last 24 hours, there's a lot of sorrow, a lot of pain, a lot of misunderstanding. And you know, we're always praying to be more like Jesus, and then God allows us to have the experiences and the heartache and the sorrow that will make us more like him, and we immediately pray for it to be taken away. And I'm not saying we revel in and wallow in sorrow and pain, but we accept it as a crucible that will make us more like the Master. We need you, we want you, we love you, your pain is real, and we're sorry. Don't send that letter.
And you know, one of the things that I think Neylan pointed out in her book that is helpful, is a helpful piece, is that when you are looking at the kingdom of God, at your little tiny place in the kingdom of God, you can't and never will be able to overlay a Fortune 500 company outline or worldly outline, structures over the kingdom of God. It's its own thing. And so, as we try to compare our life outside the church to see how it compares to it, it doesn't compare. It's its own heart. And so we have to take that on its own merits. And I thought that was a very helpful point in your book.
Hurry up. Okay, we need to end soon.
I know we need to end. I'm just I'm thinking this whole time, what question am I going to ask? Because I need to ask one. So my question is for Maxine. I came to the wrong book Sunday because I brought Maxine's Women in Authority. That's okay, because I want you to sign on.
As long as I'm in Neylan's book too, I'll sign.
That was the plan. That was the plan. So I can't remember which article, but you mentioned something, it might have been another writer, how without institutionalized female authority, female discourse dies. And then that's why it's reborn every 20 years, every generation, as our generation comes up and says, oh, feminism, oh, we have all these ideas. And then the producer said, right, yeah, we had those ideas too. And so I'm hearing you say, okay, Maxine, your answer was, we need to restore the Relief Society to its former glory. And my question is, how does little me in my little local ward, that's what I want to have happen. What do I do to get there? What do I do?
Neylan had a number of suggestions in her book about that, and she used case studies of what Relief Society presidents are doing in their wards and states, and a few of them are here tonight who've been experimenting with things. I just want to say the structure, the inspired structure of Relief Society authority and women's authority and ministry in the church is intact. It's all there. It's intact in the church today. Women's ministry, the lay ministry, the missionary calling, the Relief Society, the temple ministry, they're all intact. They have continued from then to the present. It's just a few policy changes that we might consider. But you have so much room and latitude in your ward level to work with your Relief Society presidency, share ideas about mothers and daughters doing visiting teaching together, lessons you'd like to see, discussions about women's ministry and the relationship to priesthood that you'd like to see. You've got a lot of latitude.